Hey, Dave O'Sullivan here, and what I want to do today in part one of this special hamstring series is cover the key considerations we need to consider when we rehab a hamstring injury. So as always at thegotofysio.com, we want to look at what's causing the hamstring to become overloaded in the first place. So as that foot is about to hit the floor or just prior to terminal knee extension, we want to look at what's not doing its job. So if we consider a very simple model here of when that foot hits the floor, the gastro and the hamstring need to work and co-contract with the quads in order to give the glute max the best opportunity to propel through. So in today's video, I'm going to cover the key considerations we need to be thinking about. And not only that, then is how do we make sense of those findings in the person's previous injury and relate that and make sense of it in the objective assessment. Because once we have clarity in the objective assessment, then that's going to be massively important for us then to design a rehab program to take the athlete back to this so that we get long-lasting changes. So without further ado, let's get into today's video and look at the key considerations for hamstring injuries. So welcome to the hamstring month, and myself and Pete, we're going to go through a hamstring assessment now over the course of this month. We're going to give you some tips on what to look at in that assessment and what maybe you want to consider in addition to the already good stuff that you've been taught at university. Remember, the New Grad Sports Physio website, it's not intended to replace your university education, but more so just to add on and give you additional bits of information that you may or may not have considered, okay? Because the reality is when we're working in sport, and especially professional sport, it's not always as black and white as we may have liked, okay? So over the next few weeks, you're going to get a lot of stuff in terms of your assessment, your treatment, and then your return to play that you may have not considered, or being taught in university. So the big thing with the subjective assessment that I would ask the patient is I would want to know exactly how this injury happened first and foremost, okay? Because you're going to have a lot of athletes come into you and they're going to present with this posterior thigh pain, okay? Now in the assessment section, I'm going to show you some nice tips that I use to, help me differentiate that. But an obvious thing where we will be, suspecting that there could be some kind of fiber damage would be actually an athlete where they went full out sprinting and they had the old sniper where all of a sudden they pull up, and you'd see this in a 100-meter sprinter sometimes in races where they almost start hobbling, okay? So in that scenario, it probably doesn't take a genius to work out that there's probably some type of fiber damage there. Now, the big thing with that, okay, if the athlete, Pete says to me, okay, I was sprinting, I was doing, I was accelerating 10, 20 meters, and then as I got off the top end speed, it just went, okay? And they'll use that kind of terminology, okay? Whether that's right or wrong. But if Pete said that to me, I would still continue my subjective assessment because I want to know why those particular tissues experienced excessive stress so that the load placed upon that tissue exceeded its capacity to tolerate that load, okay? So that's usually when a tissue gets injured. So the subjective assessment is still very important in that regard. So what I would want from Pete then is I would want to go back and look at my injury history for that athlete, okay? So I'd want to know, why do these tissues, these particular tissues, why did that load exceed its capacity to tolerate it, okay? So then we would go through Pete's previous injuries and I would write all those injuries down, and then what I would do is I would look and ask myself, is there any previous injuries here that could potentially have caused some kind of motor adaptation to these injuries that has now placed excessive stress on that hamstring? And that's going to be very important for me when I'm designing my rehabilitation program, because a lot of my rehab will be focused. Yeah, sure, we still need to address the hamstring tissues and make sure that they're recovering. But the next time Pete goes out and he sprints 10, 20, 30 meters top end speed, if that hamstring is recovered now, is he still going to continue to experience additional stress maybe on that hamstring? Or can we do in a rehab is address maybe the reasons we think cause that hamstring tissue to experience excessive loads. So then what I might find is, okay, Pete's had a few different previous injuries. Maybe we might want to go back and have a quick look at those as well. Okay, and I won't be so quick, and actually figure out, okay, is Pete's nervous system happy to produce force in any given direction in all these tissues so that the whole body can do its job, versus one particular part maybe using excessive forces. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. So that would be one thing, would be the previous injury. I'd be very, very interested. Okay, so again, if that athlete came in and goes, yeah, the sniper got me, hamstring just went, okay, we still have a little bit of detective work to do in the subjective assessment. We have to find out what previous injuries potentially, if any, may have impacted that to do excessive forces. Okay. Your other scenario that you're going to see is when an athlete may come in and they have got through the session, okay, and then they'll say, yeah, I don't know, I think I've done something to my hamstring here. It just feels like it's achy or sore. So the athlete may have continued the session. Now, from my own experience, that's usually an athlete that's done a lot of running, okay, so a lot of prolonged running. And as the session's gone on, so if they're doing some kind of conditioning or something like that, and as that session's gone on, that hamstring's just got tighter and tighter. And then towards the end of the session, it's almost like a dull ache, okay? Now, we have to remember from our pain science that all these sensations, whether it's a tightness or whether it's genuine pain, these are just perceptions, okay, from that nervous system to alert us to take action or potentially to change something, okay? So again, the tightness was probably a warning signal, and then as we continued to do the activity and we almost ignored what the subconscious and the brain was telling us, then that pain started to develop, okay, or that tightness started to develop into some kind of increased unpleasant experience, if that makes sense, okay? So in that scenario, we'd be thinking, okay, again, is there some area of the body that's maybe not doing its job, that has put excessive forces on particular tissues that has ultimately resulted in this pain, okay? And then the other thing we need to consider is that it actually may not be the hamstring at all. So in a scenario like this, where Pete was telling me, okay, I was doing a lot of conditioning, you know, and as I started to get through the session more and more, as I started to get a bit fatigued, and as maybe my posture wasn't as good, or my running technique wasn't as good, that's when I started to notice that, it started to feel a bit tighter and tighter and tighter, okay? Now, again, we've no real, decent evidence to suggest that posture's got anything to do with it, but what I mean by posture is his running posture. So as he started to fatigue, maybe he started to carry himself in different ways than he usually would if he's nice and fresh, and maybe that then put excessive demands on other tissues, okay? So that's stuff that I'm just thinking all in my head here. Now, the other thing that we want to establish here that's very, very important is the story, okay? So we want to establish with Pete what Pete's been doing leading up to this injury, okay? So again, has there been any increased spike in training load, okay? Has Pete been changing surfaces a lot, okay? Has he been doing something that maybe he usually isn't used to doing that he may be doing now? And if it's amateur athletes you're working with, again, his job, okay? What's he been doing a lot of, like in amateur rugby league and stuff like that, or part-time rugby league, even where players are working during the day and then they're coming training in the evening. What's their job? And maybe what excessive pressures have they been putting on certain tissues where the system maybe is perceived a threat and cause some kind of adaptation. Okay, because the motor adaptations are going to be very, very important. And that's a lot of the stuff we're going to have to undo in the rehab and the actual treatment of the hamstring injury. Okay, so they'd be the big things. And then the final thing that we have to consider is that the actual pain down that posterior leg may have got nothing to do with the hamstring in the first place, okay? Maybe the tissue, maybe the nerve is a little bit sensitized, or maybe that sensation that they're feeling, okay, coming down the leg has maybe been driven by somewhere else in the body again, okay? From my experience, especially any protective tone around muscles around the hip, the glute medius, the deep rotators, piriformis, all those kind of deep tissues, if they are carrying some kind of protective tone, that very often we can see that sensation tend to travel down into the posterior thigh, okay? So again, we want to consider that as well, that actually the hamstrings may not be the issue either. Now, the one thing I would be very, very careful of if you are lucky enough is to have access to MRIs, is to hold off scanning your players unless you absolutely need to. So from my own experience, what I usually like to do is for the majority of players in season. Okay, if we had a grand final coming up in a week's time or 2 weeks time, or we had a big game coming up, then yeah, sure, I might get a scan just to get that little bit of information in. But I still wouldn't put all my eggs into one basket with the scan. So with that, I'd just be very, very careful about getting scans. So when an athlete comes in with an injury, especially one where he hasn't had a sniper, okay, just go all of a sudden, but he's felt this pain come on gradually, or he just felt a twinge or some kind of thing like that, I would usually wait for a couple of days to see how that player settled down, okay? Because sometimes we know from the literature as well that, what is being shown on MRI isn't necessarily correlates with the athlete clinically, okay? And I'm pretty sure that I would have sent players back and they've had successful return to plays after hamstring injuries, whereas if we'd actually MRI'd them before they went back, there would be some kind of high signal changes still present, okay? So just because there's signal changes on an MRI doesn't necessarily mean that the athlete's going to present with pain, restriction, or an inability to actually partake in training, high-speed running, or actually a game, okay? So we need to be careful with the MRI and not let that bias us too much, okay? So that's your subjective assessment. Again, was it a sharp pain and it just went, or did it get just a little twinge or a tweak, okay? That's kind of the words they tend to say. And again, I very much see the tweak or the twinge as a warning signal from the brain and from the subconscious just to go, hang on a second here. So I see that as a good sign. And again, I'll be passing that on to the athlete in the reassurance bit of the actual treatment and our conversation. So sometimes that twinge is just going, whoa, 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 take it easy here, okay? These tissues are on the point of the load on that tissue exceeding its capacity to tolerate that load, okay? So that's something else I would consider with the hamstring, okay? Said if the pain kind of built up and it came on after prolonged running, or it came on over a few days, or the hamstring felt tight for a bit and now it's developed into an ache, then that's kind of good news for us. So I'll be looking again at the previous injury histories, the load, the story, and figuring out why this injury happened. Okay, so that's your subjective. In the next section, we're going to go through some very, very simple tests to give us an idea and to help us differentiate whether it is truly a hamstring driven pain experience, or whether there's other tissues that may be contributing to it as well. Okay, so for this, again, we're assuming that it's a pretty acute injury here, that it's not a persistent pain case, in which case we may slightly differ our management. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you want to know more information about looking at the whole body as one, but keeping it very, very simple and always understanding why you're doing something with your patient, then head over to www.thegotofysio.com, and we've got plenty of resources there for you also. In the next video in this series, we're going to have a look at some very simple assessments that you can do to identify what's not doing its job, that's going to put extra load and stress on the hamstring. I'll see you next time.